Tonight, Monday Night Raw takes place from the Amway Center in Orlando, Florida, inside the WWE Thunderdome as we continue the road to Survivor Series. What we're going to talk about in this Raw preview is the target on the back of the WWE Champion Randy Orton. Now, this is something that WWE have been talking about quite a lot and hyping up ever since last week's episode. Last week's ending of Monday Night Raw, I must say, I did enjoy quite a lot. I like the idea that there are multiple people interested in Randy Orton and his WWE Championship. Of course, you have the former champion, Drew McIntyre, still keen to get back his WWE Championship. You have the Fiend, Bray Wyatt, quite literally lurking over the shoulder of the Viper. Of course, Randy Orton and Bray Wyatt have their history, so that isn't done by any stretch of the imagination. Then you've also got outside threats such as The Miz, the brand new Mr. Money in the Bank, all vying for Randy Orton's WWE Championship. Now, WWE.com have said that the Apex Predator is back on top of the WWE food chain, but there are multiple people on Monday Night Raw willing to take him down. Now, obviously, let's go through some of these people that are looking at the target on the back of Randy Orton. Of course, as I mentioned first, you have Drew McIntyre, the former WWE champion. To me, as I mentioned, to me, he has to still be in the conversation. You've obviously got the Fiend, Bray Wyatt, obviously on the Firefly Funhouse last week on Monday Night Raw. You had a Funhouse episode with Bray Wyatt dressed as the Mad Hatter. You also had Alexa Bliss in there going full Harley Quinn. But they also teased the upcoming feud, I suppose, between Bray Wyatt and Randy Orton in the near future in WWE and on WWE television. And this played off Randy Orton being a guest on a Moment of Bliss. Last week was the main event segment of Monday Night Raw. And they played up Bray Wyatt and Randy Orton's history. Of course, Randy Orton and Bray Wyatt have a very storied history when it comes to WWE television. Of course, Randy Orton at one point was a part of the Wyatt family. He infiltrated the Wyatt family on SmackDown Live in 2016 and 2017. He aligned himself with the Eater of Worlds version of Bray Wyatt. He aligned himself with Luke Harper at the time and became a member of the Wyatt family. It was a great storyline. This all culminated in Randy Orton eventually turning on Bray Wyatt. He actually burned down the Wyatt family compound in that infamous SmackDown moment where Randy Orton sets fire to the compound. Bray Wyatt goes crazy and it's still thought about today, and they actually showed flashbacks to it last week on Monday Night Raw during the Firefly Funhouse segment. They actually had on the wall behind Bray Wyatt, where all the pictures are of Bray's victims, they had a picture of the compound being burnt down by Randy Orton, and obviously Bray Wyatt remembers. This then led to a WrestleMania 33 match for the WWE Championship in which Randy Orton defeated Bray Wyatt, because Bray Wyatt never, ever, ever, or that version of Bray Wyatt certainly never, ever won a major match on a big stage. If it was a big match on a big stage like a WrestleMania, Bray Wyatt lost. The Undertaker, John Cena, Randy Orton, that's what Bray Wyatt did. He lost at WrestleMania. That was his deal for whatever reason, and that's why Bray Wyatt ultimately had to change. That's why he had to change into the Fiend and the Firefly Funhouse version of Bray Wyatt, because every time he had a big match he lost. He wasn't believable as this big credible superstar anymore. So he had the match against Randy Orton at WrestleMania 33 for the WWE Championship, which he lost, which was such a odd match, and not in a good way, not in a, oh, the Firefly Funhouse, that's weird. No, in a bad way, in the sense that it was just bad. He had the projections onto the ring of the worms and the maggots. It just didn't work. And then following that, you're thinking the only way is up from that terrible WrestleMania match. You had the Extreme Rules House of Horrors match. Yes. Remember that? Remember that bad cinematic match? It was just awful, awful. But what's interesting about this and why the Fiend is going after Randy Orton, and the evidence is there last week, is that the Fiend is all about righting past wrongs. You look at the Fiend's opponents so far in WWE, it fits that pattern the majority of the time. Obviously, the Fiend had his feud with Daniel Bryan. He was righting the wrong of Daniel Bryan joining the Wyatt family, similarly to Randy Orton, infiltrating the Wyatt family and betraying Bray Wyatt back in, when was that, 2013, 2014? You also had the Fiend's match against John Cena at WrestleMania this past year. And again, that was righting the wrong of John Cena defeating Bray Wyatt at WrestleMania 30. You had the Fiend's feud against Braun Strowman. That was righting the wrong of Braun Strowman leaving the Wyatt family. So it only makes sense that Bray Wyatt and the Fiend, or the Fiend, Bray Wyatt, whatever you want to call him, would look to right the wrong of Randy Orton's actions in 2017. So I do think we're going to get Randy Orton versus the Fiend at some point for the WWE Championship, some point very, very soon. Obviously not Survivor Series, because Randy Orton is going up against Roman Reigns. It's WWE Champion versus Universal Champion, Raw versus SmackDown. But possibly could we see Randy Orton versus The Fiend at TLC in December? Absolutely. But something you do have to consider when you think of that is it might not just be Randy Orton versus The Fiend. Drew McIntyre isn't out of that WWE Championship picture just yet. And realistically, why should he be? Just because he lost the title after holding it 6 months, he can't ever wrestle for it again? Hell no, it's not how it works in WWE. Now, I've criticized this numerous times, and I'm not one for the whole rematch culture that is WWE. I'm not one for rematch, 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 and WWE apparently is fascinated with that because they lack the storytelling ability to find another way of doing the match once again. But if you look on the flip side of things, you had Randy Orton lose twice to Drew McIntyre at SummerSlam and then at Clash of Champions. During that period of time as well, the now WWE Champion also lost clean to Keith Lee. So how come Randy Orton kept getting those WWE Championship opportunities? The storyline that they told because of that was because he's Randy Orton. That's why he gets the opportunities. But it should also be the same for Drew McIntyre. He's earned his opportunity to claim the WWE Championship once again. I think he's actually been pinned, what, twice in a year? So he should still be in that WWE Championship picture, and it looks like he will be. So maybe we get a triple threat TLC kind of a deal at Tables, Ladders and Chairs in December. That's where I think it's going in terms of the WWE Championship picture. But also you have to factor in The Miz too now. The Miz is now Mr. Money in the Bank. He defeated Otis at Hell in a Cell to claim the Money in the Bank briefcase. Now, while they may be teasing that The Miz could cash in the Money in the Bank briefcase at any moment, I still think he's going to be in the periphery here. I don't think The Miz will cash in his Money in the Bank briefcase until 2021, and it's still up for debate whether or not he would cash in successfully, because either way, it doesn't hurt The Miz. The Miz can cash in, become WWE Champion, and I think he can run with it. He's better than he was 10 years ago when he was the WWE Champion the first time around. But if he cashes in and he loses, he's The Miz. He's been around forever, like 15 years at this point. He's bulletproof. He's on 3 shows on the USA Network. He's on Raw, Miz and Mrs. and Cannonball. So if The Miz wins the WWE Championship, that's great. If he loses, it doesn't matter. He's still The Miz. He still nearly holds the record behind Chris Jericho for the most Intercontinental Championships of all time. He's still had a Hall of Fame career. He's still The Miz. So he's bulletproof. But when it comes to The Miz and cashing in that Money in the Bank briefcase, I don't think The Miz will cash in on Randy Orton. And I know they're trying to suggest that there's going to be some form of parallels, because of course The Miz did cash in on Randy Orton when he won his first WWE Championship back in 2011. So I've seen teasers of that and people saying, are they going to try and do the same thing 10 years apart? I don't think so. Now, what I do think is going to happen is that we've heard rumors and reports that Edge versus Randy Orton will continue their feud when Edge returns to the ring from his triceps injury in about 2021. And Edge versus Randy Orton 3 is scheduled for WrestleMania 37, and it will be for the WWE Championship, it looks like. That's why Randy Orton won the WWE Championship from Drew McIntyre at Hell in a Cell. Now, Dave Meltzer is even suggesting it could be an I Quit match for the WWE Championship at WrestleMania. Personally, I don't know about the I Quit stipulation. The reason I say that is we have to consider that we just had the Hell in a Cell match between Roman Reigns and Jey Uso. That was an I Quit match. Would they do those 2 matches so close together? I don't know. Nevertheless, I think when it comes to Edge versus Randy Orton for the WWE Championship, considering the storyline, considering where this is going, Edge pretty much has to win that match. Personally, I would rather it didn't have the WWE Championship, as I don't think the feud needs it. But if that's what Vince McMahon wants, it's his toy box, right? We can't change that. But I don't think Edge is going to be a Brock Lesnar, and by that I mean Edge respects the business way too much to be the WWE Champion and not be there all the time. Now, I do think the story that WWE are trying to tell when it comes to Edge is that the story is Edge was forced to retire in 2011. He can never take a bump again. He never wrestle again. If he takes a bump or even a funny fall, he could be paralyzed. And then 9 years later, he makes a miraculous return at 2020 in the Royal Rumble. And then once again at WrestleMania in 2021, he becomes the WWE Champion. That would be an amazing story. Think about that. From medically disqualified to WWE Champion. It would be absolutely incredible. 9 years apart, he retired as the World Heavyweight Champion in 2011, and then 9 years later, he's the WWE Champion once again. That would be amazing. But he isn't going to be the WWE Champion where he's working matches on Raw and every pay-per-view as a WWE Champion should be. His body can't take that, and his contract doesn't state that he's going to be there on Raw every week and he's going to be wrestling matches on TV every week. He's only got a limited amount of appearances and limited amount of matches contracted to the WWE. But I do think Edge is going to become the WWE Champion in 2021. Therefore, what I'm suggesting will happen, and what I think could happen, is that I think Edge wins the WWE Championship from Randy Orton at WrestleMania. Then, the very next night on Monday Night Raw, the Raw after WrestleMania, Raw after Mania, whatever you want to call it, we have one of the biggest moments in the history of Monday Night Raw after WrestleMania, as The Miz cashes in on Edge and becomes the WWE Champion for only the second time in his career, and that was 10 years after he became the WWE Champion for the first time. I know some people will say, it's unlikely, and it might be unlikely, but it's certainly an interesting story, and it would certainly be a moment. Now, obviously, that's a bit of a tangent there that I've gone off to, and I'm talking about Edge and Randy Orton and all that sort of stuff, but it's all in there. It's all mixing up very, very nicely on Monday Night Raw. And as I mentioned, I think Drew McIntyre and The Fiend are going to be involved for the WWE Championship picture going forward. I think we're going to get that triple threat match probably at TLC, but it's interesting to see how they're going to stretch this out. We know Survivor Series is on the horizon. Are we going to continue to have Raw and SmackDown invasions? At this point, that feels like it's overdone, to be honest, but it makes the pay-per-view feel strange because there's not a lot of actual build there, because there's separate storylines going on Raw and SmackDown, and then you just have the pay-per-view. It's a very confusing position right now when it comes to the storylines on Raw and SmackDown. Are they going to be kept separate? Is there going to be some interchanging? I don't know. In terms of Randy Orton versus Roman Reigns, again, it's very interesting because you have two heel champions facing off. They have worked before. I think they had a match at SummerSlam in 2014, Roman Reigns and Randy Orton. They've had okay matches, completely different characters at this point, especially Roman Reigns. So it's something I'm very, very looking forward to. But as far as tonight goes, don't be surprised if once again the Fiend is lurking over the shoulder of the Viper, but also maybe the Scottish Psychopath too. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on where the WWE Championship picture will be going starting tonight on Monday Night Raw? Do you think it's going to be Randy Orton versus The Fiend, Randy Orton versus Drew McIntyre, a triple threat match? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll be sure to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, chatting with you guys about Monday Night Raw. We will be doing a watch along tonight on Raw, so be sure to check the channel out for that. Set a reminder, if you subscribe, bottom right hand corner, click that notification bell. You'll be notified when we go live tonight for the Monday Night Raw watch along. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button as well. Really does help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if you haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, as I mentioned, subscribe, bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.